Welcome to Neurotypical's Don't Juggle Chainsaws, the podcast that cuts through the rubbish to explore the world of neurodiversity. I'm your host, Nic King.
And I'm your host, Kate Fox, and together we're here to explore, understand, and celebrate being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world. From ADHD and autism to dyslexia and other quirky brains, we talk about it all.
And go off on tangents. So, whether you're neurodivergent, love someone who is, or you're just curious about neurodivergent minds, you are in the right place.
Let's get ready to juggle some words and maybe even a few chainsaws, metaphorically, of course.
Hello, welcome back to Neurotypical's Don't Juggle Chainsaws with me, Nic King, and our lovely Kate Fox. And today we have decided to do a bit of a tough one. We were like, should we do it? Should we not? And then whenever you're thinking like, you should always do it. Always do it. So today we're going to talk about why identification, be that diagnosis or self-identification, can fuck your relationships.
I didn't know if you were going to go for the full-on sweary
Fuck.
title there. Yeah. But
Sorry if there are children present. It may or may not be bleeped yet.
yes. And also then optimistically I was like, also how it could possibly save your relationships.
I think there's definitely something in finding a new community.
Absolutely. But I suppose we are wanting to. But normally we're so positive, aren't we? But it is a true thing that actually the massive identity shift that is diagnosis, self-identity, self-identification can really change how you relate to other people, because ultimately it's changing how you relate to yourself. And some people will deal with that really well, and some people will not deal with that really well.
I think it's that moment, isn't it? There's a moment where you either, self-identify or diagnosed, or probably one, then the other, or both. There's a huge reflection in that moment where you think, oh, this other 10, 20, 30, 40 years, 50, depends when you did it, of my life is now being reframed within that lens. And what can I learn from that going forward? And then you start to sort of action some of those thoughts. And I think often they can then go down quite badly with some people, maybe.
And partly, I suppose, because what is happening is change, and some sort of status quo had been achieved in a relationship, maybe. And now one of you is kind of unilaterally going, hello, I would like some changes because I have changed, or my attitude, my lens has changed. So to make this concrete for me, as an example, so my genuinely lovely ex-husband was really helpful around the process of my diagnosis, because you had to have an interview with someone who knew you well. So he was the person who did that. But his basic approach at the time in 2017, when I got my diagnosis, was, yes, but I don't need to read about autism because I know you. And he was so strong on the I know you. And in a way, to be fair, like the poor bloke had spent years really being hyper vigilant around some of my, what he would see as quirks, and kind of, he knew more than I did probably, that sometimes when I was tired I really needed to rest and stay in. But I'd be like, no, we need to go out. But there again, ADHD, yeah, you need to go out. Autism, oh, I'm really burnt out after all those people, I need to stay in. He could just see that paradox, and it was a bit frustrating to him. So he was kind of quite often trying to do caretaking, but maybe trying to do caretaking without always the accurate, like it would have been so useful to both of us to know that I was a bit split between a need for stimulation and a need for rest. So it's not that he didn't make an effort to know me, he made a huge effort to know, and in a quite codependent sense between us, to really look after me. But actually, it turned out there was quite a lot of things we didn't realise about what that actually meant, and he kind of didn't want to know, really. back in 2017.
And it's
And
hard, isn't it? Because that reframing and the new knowledge, it has to be like a teamwork kind of situation and something that's fluid and moving, and because it's how relationships should always be, in that sort of the fluidity and the movement, because anything that's very long term, you change throughout, those periods in that relationship. But then you need it reframed. I think I would have struggled with somebody who didn't want to learn about neurodivergence. I think I would have struggled with that.
yeah, and it was kind of, and it's not that he didn't want to learn generally. I mean, flipping heck, at the time he was doing a lot of reading about Ireland and their geography. Um, which is quite symbolic when you think about it, really. I don't know.
As a metaphor.
I feel there's a poetic metaphor somewhere, but it was more like a block, a stumbling block. And actually, towards the end of our relationship, 'cause our marriage ended then 2 years later, and I feel like, the end of the marriage was probably, there were other things that might have ended the marriage, actually, is we had in some ways quite divergent visions of a future. But realistically, for me anyway, it was the diagnosis that meant, or
It was the beginning of the end
the
kind of thing.
beginning of the end, really. But then he went on to be diagnosed himself as ADHD, actually. So, and again, had we known that between us, because there were certain things that would really get on my wick about him that I did not really accept, particularly task procrastination. Actually, so had I accepted that, you know, I think
Yeah.
possibly still would, it's not a tragedy. It was a difficult thing for both of us. The end of our relationship was really, really, really difficult. But possibly we should have been. It's benefited us to not be together, actually, and he's now happily married to somebody else, and I'm genuinely very happy about that. But yeah, our lack of knowledge of our own neurodivergence had a very significant, very negative effect on our marriage. And actually, one of us knowing didn't help. Maybe if we'd both known at the same time. But as you say, there's something about you. Ideally, you'd be a team then.
Yeah. And it's not like anyone's doing relationships well. Do you know what I mean? Divorce rates through the roof. And I think the statistics 2 to 1 for women like initiating that. And I think that's, well outside of sort of neurodivergence and things like that. But often, because as neurodivergent people, we often have very sort of spiky profiles in things that we are incredibly good at and things that we are incredibly not good at. I often think it's a lot in that sort of, that the tasks, or it's the mental workload for me. It's the remembering everything that it really comes down to, regularly me, because I is the organizer and the planner, etc. But sometimes that's, you can hold too much in your head, can't you?
Absolutely.
Um, Particularly, when you have more things, when you're working and you have children and you have a relationship and you have families, and the list is like long. And I think maybe there's something in self-identification and diagnosis there, where you think, I wasn't just finding this hard, my brain is actually exhausted, and now I have a word for that, and I have an understanding of that, and I need, like, my partner to come on board to that understanding. And if they're not in the same place at the same time, that's an incredibly, like, you're on 2 different platforms getting 2 different trains at that point, aren't you?
Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. And that feels like that ties into the wider social phenomenon of people in marriages. And as you say, mainly women actually initiating the end of long-term partnerships and marriages, going, hang on, I did the traditional role of caretaker, of organizer of everything, I'm not up for that traditional role now. And I've been reading Instagram accounts about how I could be self-fulfilled and developed in multiple ways. Other ways to realise that this is the thing are available, but I'm reading a lot of Instagram accounts at the moment. And I want more. And I want more than the traditional model. I very much don't want to make this binary, but actually the gender stuff is really important. There's something about, I want more than the traditional model of many male female partnerships had offered. Now I didn't have that because I was already in a non-traditional. Basically, my ex-husband did all the domestic stuff, all the cooking, all the sorting out, all the looking after the dog, and I went out and did the breadwinning. The trouble with that was I was persistently absolutely burned out from going into the world, hunter-gathering among people, and doing the breadwinning, and I really, really needed a rest. Whereas for him, it would have been quite difficult to then go out into the world as an undiagnosed neurodivergent man and to confront his issues with the world. So I did the world, he did the home. But I know these things are often reversed. And the only way forward is teamwork, I suppose.
And I think it is about teamwork. And I don't like you saying you had a non-traditional sort of relationship thing. And even, outside of any genders, male relationship, female relationships, all encompassing of the relationship spectrum, there is always normally sort of you start to like define and ship out rules at different points of your relationship, don't you? Like when you move in together, there's normally an agreement about something about, who does the dishes and who does the cooking and yeah. And I think often it's hard to like step out of kind of what you agreed early on and
Mm,
like re-examine it and re-look at it and have very like honest conversations about like what doesn't work for you anymore. And then if you start adding in communication differences and alexithymia and the double empathy problem and being perceived and societal expectations and oh my god, the list
mm.
that we
It's
have extra going on, you can see why it's we're playing it on hard.
absolutely. And I feel like, so actually, to return, because there's almost a separate topic, isn't there, about why neurodivergence and why mixed neurotype marriages or partnerships or relationships generally, why they're difficult. But returning to, so yeah, diagnosis as a factor that can. It's funny, I don't often say the F word. It sounds too harsh when I say it. So it sounds like Sean Bean, so the Yorkshire thing. Why it troubles relationships. As you say, so yes, the different roles, we get stuck in different roles. I mean, it's almost like there's a fork in the road and a point of recognition of neurodivergence, isn't there? Where, oh, this could be what saves us. This could be where we start talking. We could be where we reconfigure things, reframe things, where we understand. But often that is really difficult. Is there a case for then? Because I think because I had a traditional with reversed roles marriage. You're in quite a traditional marital setup. A big conversation I had with some poets after a gig for autistic poets a few weeks ago was about new models of relationship that could work for neurodivergent people, and that the only way to get those models in place was to be honest and open with whoever you were in partnership or multiple partnership with, perhaps, in which case, again, though this is my optimistic bit wanting to go, yay! So diagnosis might bugger up one relationship, but then it opens up a whole new world of them. Maybe.
I think there's something in that. I think even obviously there's, romantic relationships, sexual relationships, but friendships and, neurokin and that idea of starting to find each other because the communication will be easier, the rapport will be easier, the enjoyment of it, it'll be easier. I just saw a preprint this week actually about sort of like mixed group larger studies. So obviously there's groups where they've done quite small numbers of autistic and non-autistic people communicating. That was, the double empathy problem that was brought up in Edinburgh as well. But I've just seen a preprint of another one where it actually showed the rapport, which was what they were measuring, in the only autistic group was higher than the rapport in the entirely neurotypical group.
Ah.
And like they rated their interactions more positively than like not even the mixed groups, the group that identified as neurotypical and the group that identified as autistic. Yeah, they were rated their rapport higher than the other people. And I
Oh,
like that.
I love
I
that. See, that's one of the take that people who think that autistic people can't communicate. We know that we can. Although I have to say, I suppose post I did a very literal thing. I think post leaving my marriage, I was like, well, clearly another autistic person will understand me. Um, and everything will be fine. And actually there was a very high rapport, but we both struggled with our relationship skills in various ways. And again, I don't know how like it's a I, I think my relationship skills are now better, but I'm saying that as a single person, as someone who's been single for 18 months going, think there might have been some work I might have needed to do here. Have been doing that work. And actually, okay, so returning to our topic, do you know the thing, and this is not ideal, but the thing I think I have needed most post diagnosis, don't run out and leave your relationship, happily partnered people, but has been some serious time on my own working out who I am as an autistic person, not in relationship, not masking in my home because there's just me, and figuring out how to live that. Actually, it wasn't the first thing actually I thought that was going to happen post marriage, and then I quite quickly got into um another relationship. I think subconsciously, probably maybe I was scared of being on my own, whatever it was. But the 18 months since then that I've been on my own, this is me far more unmasked. I've not got anyone else confusing.
and you did the very clever thing of not breeding, because sometimes some of us are never alone. Because we
That
made more of us.
exactly, yeah. Yeah,
There's
you're
that.
more of the tribe, but then you are indeed never alone. However, I would have thought, am I wrong? Maybe I'm wrong. Oh, I probably am wrong. But isn't it easier post diagnosis to shift? Oh, maybe it's not. To shift your relationship as a parent to your children. Yeah, no, that sounds of course, that's also complicated in all sorts of ways, isn't it?
Yeah, I think quite a lot of exactly what you've described. You have had the space and solitude to figure out exactly what works for you. Whereas when you are fundamentally a caregiver and have to deprioritize yourself against somebody else because you created them, it's a lot harder to do. It isn't something that I have desperately struggled with. I think, and this is something that's moving and shifting, and you need to be a team about within a relationship, is attempting to balance and reassess everybody's needs. Because a lot of people come and talk to me about not prioritizing themselves and their needs as a parent, and often the first question I ask is, how old's your child? Because if they're under 5, you're knackered. Like, 5-year-olds cannot perceive themselves particularly as a separate entity to you. They are not, no matter what their neurotype, there. So you can't really do anything with a child that's under 5 other than just get on the roller coaster and ride it until a point. But as they get older, you can start to have those conversations about, your needs. Like, currently my youngest is watching a YouTube creator that I would rather scratch my eyes out than listen to. And if they want to put that in the telly in the front room, that's fine, but I am not going to be in the same room with that. But because they're now that little bit older, they're over 5, they're like 8, now we can have that conversation. We can have that conversation about, like, my need not to listen to the shrill, horrific YouTube creator, who they love. And again, it's just that sort of that constant reflection. But I think obviously the more humans that you have who rely on you, the harder it is to carve out, like, what are my needs now that I have this diagnosis, this understanding. I think a lot of people come to that with, okay, what now? How do I start to break this down, particularly if, when you start to surmount needs of people, needs to make income. I think a lot of people look at their job,
Of course, of course, of course, and go, "This has been
but you
completed."
still got to pay a mortgage quite regularly, or at least rent at the very minimum. You gotta do and make something.
Yeah, yeah. And you may have, and in fact, many people will have carved out a life as far as possible that works for them
Mm.
pre-diagnosis. So they might have, unknowingly, they've always on a Saturday morning gone to, I don't know, the fishing lake, the beach, whatever it is, they've had that space. They've known it's vital, but haven't quite framed that as, oh, I mean, this is not just vital, this is an essential part of my, human need. So they've done that. And they had things that were ways to strategies to cope. But now, post-diagnosis, okay, well, do I need, can I bring in more of those strategies? Is it about an incremental gradual shift or recognition of what is, or in fact should there be bigger change?
And I think it's there where you start putting, like, boundaries in, or you can be perceived as making demands within any relationship for your own needs and for, like, coping strategies. I think that's when people start to perceive that in a manner not necessarily how it's intended. You can be like, I've had this realization. I've realized that this X thing really doesn't work for me and I need less of it, or I've realized this Y thing really does work for me and I need more of it. Um, and that can be, I think, often because a lot of us are sort of fawners, or a lot of us have a lot of trauma. There's been a lot of invalidation. That sort of that context switch where you start to say, I need more of this, I need less of that. And people are like, oh, that's not the relationship we have. And you're like, well, it's either has to be, or it has to just, I think a lot of us, I don't know, I'm a bit of a stopper of relationships. I'm like, okay, that's my line, and if you're not all right with that, then I don't wish you ill, but I'm out.
Mm, mm, mm.
Which I'm
Yeah,
not saying is a good thing. I'm just saying it's a thing.
no, yeah, it's complicated for me, that one, but I sort of am, yes. And I what I'm and I almost want to throw into the mix something that I realise I did, but it's, some other people will have done this too, so I'll share it. But essentially, in being in a relationship with another neurodivergent person who knew before I did actually that they were, I did this thing where I was like, I will fulfill their every autistic need possible because they've never fully had that, and I'm going to fulfill it. And what I was
Right.
actually doing was, you know, doing what I wanted to happen to me. I wanted someone to do that for me, but my first instinct was do it for someone else, 100%. And it was kind of, that was fairly deep rooted. Um, Now that created some issues for me, it turned out. But I tell you what it did do, when I then had time on my own, I knew, because I'd been fulfilling these needs for someone else, desperately trying to empathize with their every shift of mood into shutdown, meltdown,
That
dissociation.
level of hypervigilance sounds tiring.
Oh, it was very tiring. But I'm now applying it to myself. So it so is, I bet, for lots of people who are in a caregiver role, they maybe have,
Also meeting their own needs.
yes, And it's like, can
Yeah.
you turn that then? Turn that inward. You've probably been doing it for other people. You've probably, realistically, if you're a neurodivergent person, you're never the only neurodivergent person in your family, are you?
Oh,
Really?
no.
So have you, is there something, some leeway that you've been giving to others that it is now time to give to yourself, while somehow brilliantly using your UN level style negotiation skills to make it all okay with everyone else in your life? Mm.
Sounds tiring.
Ah, well, luckily we have loads of spare energy, what with our 42% extra processing of the world every single minute. Mm. Yeah, it's a
I think
lot.
I'm gonna go have a nap. So
It's no wonder I think that every religious person I meet, like all the Buddhist monks and nuns and stuff, are autistic because they've just gone, oh, do you know what? No.
thing is though, isn't that all about like self-reflection and environmental reflection? And reasonably, I tend to gravitate towards people who can at least do that or want to at least do that because my opinion is obviously, everyone should be self-reflective, but I think particularly what I find within our sort of like neurodivergent community, it's those people who aren't able to do the self-reflection that I like, they can be really problematic.
Yes, yes. And actually, if only there were, self-reflection is absolutely vital, isn't it, to make relationships work. Self-reflection can be really difficult if you have experienced a lot of trauma in the past, and therefore find, tend to cut off from difficult emotions, and therefore it's difficult to have kind of reflective thoughts if you're busy cutting off every feeling that comes your way, if you're alexithymic, if you have memory problems. uh
If
I've
you just describe what community.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So again, can we maybe, oh no, we always come back to the thing of privilege, but um and actually I don't think particularly, I don't know. I've had my moments as an, I mean, now, flipping egg, now I would totally go out with me. I am an excellent partner. I would be brilliant. Flip, oh, but in the
I feel
past,
like this has turned into an advertisement for
I
Kate.
know
Get in touch,
exactly.
listener.
I didn't mean to, yeah, I'm quite enjoying my
I
sojourn.
would give them at least 4.5 stars. Totally recommend.
But in the past, when I was not able to do some of that self-reflection work, I was able to overthink, but that's quite different, isn't it, to self-reflection? And there were not as many tools available, I wouldn't say, to people as there potentially are now, tools for in which you can reflect on your relationship skills, on what an even relationship could be.
Mm.
Is there something about, this is one of the things that, if only it was available to people post-diagnosis as support. And I don't know how you could do it without it being really patronizing, but a sort of, no, self-reflection toolbox for those of us who haven't surmounted all the obstacles that there undoubtedly are to self-reflection.
As somebody who's obviously clearly automatically immediately written training in the head, I think the problem that you would come across in trying to do something like that is some very, very diverse trauma that we all have. Because often, in within friendships, within romantic relationships, within work relationships, within sexual relationships, we often have a very, very large amount of trauma. And I often think this is this sort of self-actualization. And then, how the other week we were talking about like levels of self-actualization. I think that there's something in that you go, okay, well, doing this process has hurt me in the past. I want to no longer do this process. And that's, I think that's a very, very strong boundary that people can struggle with.
Absolutely. Although, in that case, to end on an optimistic note, I think there are other ways to get there, to get past that idea that it's a really difficult thing to self-actualize and self-reflect. And sometimes it is about very gentle becoming part of a community, listening to a podcast like this, doing some reading, following some accounts on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, and just gradually shifting the way that you relate to yourself and relate to others. And there is now far more information available for those others to absorb without even doing it on purpose, really. So you know, is the divorce rate going to come down? Are the partnerships of all neurodivergent people going to be joyous unions of oxytocin fueled bliss? No, but we definitely have far more tools available to us than at any other point in history to make it happen.
Thanks for tuning in to Neurotypicals Don't Juggle Chainsaws. We're so glad you joined us today to explore the fascinating world of neurodivergence with your hosts, me, Nic King.
And me, Kate Fox. If our conversation sparked a thought, a question, or even a smile, don't keep it to yourself. Drop us a line at hello@neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk or visit our website, neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk, to write in. We'd love to hear from you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, consider leaving us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast platform.
Until next time, keep embracing the unique ways you juggle the chainsaws of life.